Hello everyone, welcome back to the Christ MotoGP Podcast. This week it's just myself, Jordan Morla and Pete McLaren. Rob has decided to ditch us and take some time off. Well, that's his loss. We're here to talk about the Catalan Grand Prix and plenty of other things about MotoGP. The decision for Ducati, Joan Mir's future. There's so much to talk about. But firstly, Pete, I want to talk about Catalunya, Barcelona, the circuit. It's such an iconic place for MotoGP. When you think of Catalunya, what's your first memories of the place? It's so iconic, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's seen some plenty of action over the years, hasn't it? Yeah, I think probably top of the list is obviously that last corner pass with Rossi and Lorenzo in 09. Also because leading up to it, I mean, it was the first time in the whole 800cc era we actually had a race decided by a final lap pass. I remember we were going race after race. Is this going to be the one where something happens? And finally it did. But like 2.5 years nearly into the 800cc era. So bearing that in mind, it was obviously a great way to win a race anyway. But when you add in that it had been so long since we'd seen that kind of action anywhere on the last lap, really, it just put everything together. And the two great rivals, the teammates, Lorenzo's home race as well, and it was that one stands out. There's also been a lot of big accidents over the years, hasn't there? Obviously the one last year is fresh in all of our memories, but also before that, probably the Capirossi and Gibernau tangle into turn one, with Sete literally doing that somersault when he hit the front brake lever. And of course that's why they've all got these protectors on the handlebars now, is really after that incident. But probably, I mean, Capirossi, he was on amazing form that year, the last year of the 990s. And with what went on later in that year, with all the chaos at the end of the year, Hayden getting taken out by Pedrosa and Rossi falling at the final round. I mean, without those points that Capirossi lost there, and obviously he was riding injured in the races that followed as well. He braved it. He kept racing, and he was... Gibernau was injured as well. And without that, who knows? It was certainly his best chance, I think, to go for a title there. And but Ducati, of course, they got it the following year, 07 with Casey in the 800cc era. But yeah, I suppose those sort of things would be top of my list, Jordan.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I was actually starting that incident in 2006. I remember watching that, and when you see the replays now, there's so many things happening in that. Marco Melandri is caught on the back of, I think it's Danny Pedrosa's bike, and he's so lucky that his arm doesn't get caught in between the wheel and stuff. Honestly, if you haven't seen this, Christ, to any new listeners or anyone that hasn't followed MotoGP that long, go back and watch that incident, because it was so scary. And thankfully, like Pete said, the brake protectors are in now in place. That really wouldn't happen now, but such a scary incident. And like you say, Pete, it effectively cost Capirossi a chance at the world title. And when you think about it, Ducati would have been known for 2 in a row then, if you think about Stoner winning the year after. So yeah, and like you say, the most iconic moment, Valentino Rossi, Jorge Lorenzo, just that whole rivalry, the Lorenzo wearing the Barcelona helmet, he was at home Grand Prix, the commentary from Gavin Emmett and Nick Harris, when you even watch it back as well, it's, Gavin Emmett says with like 3 corners to go, Lorenzo told him at the start of the week that if he leads into the final sector, no one's getting past. And there's this yellow 46 just up the inside, near loses the front on the inside, gasses it to the line, wins. Just iconic, really. It literally does. I've actually got some goosebumps. I think about it still, even when you watch it. Even to this day, it's so good, and it's a great circuit for it. And there's also my last memory, really, that stands out, was Jorge Lorenzo 2019. Maybe the last time we'd seen him competitively push on a motorbike. He got a great start. Chaos assumed at that bend of that back straight. He wiped out Dovizioso, Lorenzo, Rossi and Vinales. Marquez had nipped through at the right time. And really that was it for Lorenzo. His career kind of took a real change after that and retired at the end of the season. But Catalunya is a fantastic circuit for all classes. And I will say, the last memory that I do have of this circuit was only for me from a month ago, from Toprak Razgatlioglu doing a Rossi essentially on Alvaro Bautista. So I hope that MotoGP can have more of the same this weekend. But yeah, we'll get on to the Grand Prix preview in a moment. We're going to talk about Ducati's decision, Pete. And for me, it seems that this weekend is going to be the crucial, maybe the deciding point. We don't know what they're thinking. They might have made their minds up already. But when you look at it on paper, Jorge Martin leading the World Championship, Marc Marquez sitting there in third place in the World Championship, level on points with Enea Bastianini. Is it this weekend that decides it, or will they really make their decision at Mugello, or will they allow themselves more time? What do you think?
As you say, there's a difference, isn't there, between announcing a decision and making a decision. And I think, we've heard this Mugello date for a while now, haven't we? That this will be when they decide. And I think Gigi's mentioned it. So, that sort of, this will be when you'll hear. And I think he's used the sort of the phrase that it's the sporting thing to do, because he doesn't want the riders that, obviously there's going to be some riders that are let down. There's only one place there alongside Bagnaia. Bagnaia's already got his deal done. Give them time to find other seats and not keep them hanging on. But, and that's undoubtedly true. That is very sporting. But I think, if they are announcing it there, it's because they know. It's because they know what they want, isn't it? I think if you look back, you look at Dovi in 2020, you look even at the Bastianini and the Martin decision a couple of years back. Those did run on quite late in the year. So Ducati have been willing in the past to sort of, if they're not sure, they will wait. So the fact that they are saying Mugello, which is obviously the directly the weekend after Catalunya, they're back-to-backs, aren't they? That tells you that I think they know who they want really as well. I think it is true, it is sporting. It will give the riders that don't get the seat that they want the opportunity to, if they want, to go somewhere else. But yeah, I think, if that's the case, if that's the date, it means that they've seen enough. And Gigi, obviously, he's a great engineer, he's a data guy, he's a numbers guy. He'll be looking at the results, the performances. I think the data will be the big thing for him though. And presumably he's seen enough. Yeah, I think that's what that tells us. If Mugello is the date, they know who they want.
Yeah, that's a good point you actually make about the numbers and stuff. So here's a good question for you. It's Marc Marquez is it'll be his 6th race on the Ducati. Plus Jorge Martin's had his whole time in his MotoGP career on a Ducati. How important is that in terms of you can see someone spread over a couple of years, how they develop on a Ducati compared to a short window like Marquez? Do you think that comes into it as well?
I think it's they're definitely going to be looking, aren't they, at where they see the curve, the performance curve of each rider, isn't it? How steep is it? How much? Where's it going to go from here? Where are they going to be? Let's say at the start of next year. If the rider that will be in the factory team, what level will they be at? And it's difficult, isn't it? Because you've got the one guy, Jorge Martin, who's still very young and on this fantastic. I mean, what more could he do at the moment? I mean, he's won a couple of Grand Prix, he's won sprint races, he's leading the World Championship, he's beating the guy that Ducati have already signed on a satellite bike. But then you've got Marc, and you've got these big unknown of, he's already fighting with these guys on a year-old bike in only 5 Grand Prix. So where will he go with this? And of course, those words of Gigi about looking at the histories of the riders, isn't it, is what have made everybody's ears pick up, because there's only one rider on the grid, let's say, that has more history than any other, quite clearly. Yeah. So that makes everybody listen up. But you asked us all for a one-word answer, didn't you, on the podcast last week? We left it on a bit of a cliffhanger, didn't we? We carried on talking about it afterwards because it is such a great topic, and I think you've been saying that a lot of people have been putting in their predictions and everything else as well. And I'm sure you could bring us up to date on that in a minute. Yeah. But interesting, wasn't it? Yeah, I went with Martin, and you and Rob went with Marquez, and then we were talking about you can even how you look at the question is who will they sign? Who should they sign? But for me, the Martin thing, it's interesting because you mentioned Lorenzo earlier in his race there, and he's mentioned, I think, in the past week or so also, similar, and I agree with him on this, that the trouble is, in a perfect world, if you're Ducati, you want to keep both of them. Let's be honest.
Yep.
That's your perfect dream goal, isn't it? You've got Bagnaia. If you could keep Martin and Marquez as well, I mean, what a lineup. I mean, and who knows with Bastianini? Maybe he would be happier going back to, doing a swap with Marquez. Go back to Gresini, where he won those races and looked really comfortable. So potentially you could still keep these guys, but only if you sign Martin. Because if you sign Marc, Martin's gone. If we take Martin at his word, he's not going to hang around and be a satellite rider for any more years. So, and Lorenzo's mentioned this, and I think Petrucci's manager has also mentioned this as well. And I think that for me is why I lean towards Martin in that sense, in the sense of a perfect world, let's say. But we don't know exactly what the red lines are, if you pardon the pun, for each of for Martin and Marc, do we? Will Marc settle for a factory bike but not the factory team? It sounded like he wanted the factory team, and then it sort of softened a little bit last time, and so we don't quite know. But it seems like Martin, anyway, in public, has been quite clear. His line is, "I want the factory team bike. I got passed over for it before, lost out to Bastianini, and he feels that now's the time for him." So, yeah, for me, if I'm Ducati and I'm thinking, I want to keep all these guys, and I think the only way you can do that is to sign Martin for the factory team.
Yeah, it's a good point, actually. Because like you say, it's completely switches if you remove Martin from it. You can then put Marc in a factory, maybe put Enea back at Gresini. Who knows? And again, the one that always just kind of sits there, and you're like, where do you place him? Fermin Aldegar, where does he go? Because you've got the added element of Pramac, and what are they going to do with their machinery? It's like, it's a complete utter minefield. I don't know how. Even Alicia Spargo comes into it if he's going to stay with Aprilia. Does that seat free up? Does Martin go there? I don't know. It's so difficult to place it because we just need answers, really. That's just it. And like you say, a lot of people have got involved from our last podcast and they've said, I'll read out a few of the comments. So Martin Flynn has said they'll give Marquez the factory ride on the factory team. 100% sure of this. Gigi gave the subtle hint of looking at the history. And that's where he said, he looks at that. If Marquez never wins a race for them, which is highly doubtful, he's still a box office draw, and the commercial side is enormous for having him on your team. I suppose that is the one thing, Pete, that Marquez has over the whole grid, really, isn't it? It's his commercial appeal to brands. He's even, like you say, he's left Honda and went to a satellite Ducati team on a year bike, and I can guarantee you, when you watch the TV broadcast, you'll see a lot more Gresini shirts as well in that crowd because of Marc being there. He does have that effect, doesn't he?
Yeah, the star power. Yeah, obviously massive star power and marketing power and everything else. And clearly, if that's what they're looking at, and you've got to weigh up everything, haven't you? And that's the difficult thing. I think as I say, the trouble is you don't want to lose Martin either. And this is where you're trying to balance all these spinning plates, almost, aren't you? Of what could you do? I think in a perfect world, you'd kind of, or what's the most perfect solution you could realistically get? I think I'd put Marc, and I think I said this about Bastianini a few years ago when he was fighting for the championship with Gresini. I'd put Marc on a factory coloured bike as well as a factory spec bike, so factory branding in the Gresini team. So he's on a red Ducati. It looks like the factory bikes. If he wins the championship, then you still get all the marketing appeal, all the things you spoke about there, Jordan. You still get him in full Ducati red. Oh, look, there's Marc, red, Ducati, that association that people make in their minds. You get all that benefit. If he wins the championship, people still see the red bike with
exactly
on the top step. And from Marc's point of view, he would get the latest bike. He would get everything else. Of course, just making the livery look the same is not going to make it any quicker. But I mean, it would just visually give that connection of being the third factory rider. And it comes back a bit to something you said in a few previous podcasts about that Repsol Honda with the three riders,
yeah.
Isn't it? You can't do that now because of the team system, but you could paint or have the bike a bit like Pirro with the wildcards, wasn't it? It would basically be that kind of thing. That's one idea. I think Lorenzo actually said a Red Bull bike, for example, but and of course that would work with Marc. But I mean, Red Bull, they didn't really step up this year, have they? So would they step up next year? I don't know,
it's difficult because you got that Ducati Monster Energy link as well, and I don't know how these energy drinks compare with each other. It's difficult, really, because I thought, like you said, I thought Red Bull would have stepped up with Marc and really had a say on the bike, essentially, but that went to Gas, that money. So it's like, I don't know, it's so difficult to place. But like you said, the good thing to do, and Stuart has actually said it in the comments, he says Martin to the factory team, it's a no-brainer. Marc at Gresini with the factory spec bike, the latest bike and support. That is, to me, the clear thing that needs to happen. He says with Enea, he's got two options. Could he maybe replace Alex Marquez and go back to Gresini, or go to Aprilia? Now that's a good way to look at it. Enea here, we'll get on to Martina in a minute, but Enea Bastianini is a Ducati, I think, really want to keep him, Pete, and it's difficult that it's came to this, but does he have to look somewhere else realistically to stay in a factory team?
I think it'd be a surprise if he keeps his seat, wouldn't it? And I mean, he is having a much better year, isn't he? But as I say, he's never really looked that comfortable, is he? Obviously, the whole injury setback last year. I mean, that's a big thing to overcome. He lost his crew chief, of course, as well, didn't he, to KTM? So he had to make that new relationship in the factory team and that whole factory environment. So it's not been an easy situation for him, and he's having a much better start to this year. He's right up there in the standings, isn't he? Just level with Marc at the moment. So. You know, again, you don't want to lose him. I mean, realistically, Ducati, ideally, they'd want to keep all these guys, but the other factory teams are going to be circling, aren't they? They're just waiting for Ducati to make their choice, because they'll pounce on whoever is going to be disappointed, upset, use whichever word you want, by the decision, because you can't make everyone happy. And Gigi said that, hasn't he? And acknowledges that, you know, there's only one factory seat, everybody wants it, but there's going to be at least two guys, you know, out of the three obvious favourites, if you like, that are going to be disappointed, and they're sure to be targets for other factory teams, aren't they? And even satellite teams, I think. So it'd be interesting to see how, as I say, how people, what their plan B is, their plan C is, if they don't get that plan A factory ride.
Yeah, like you say, you said to me, I think it was 2 podcasts ago, why would Ducati give Marc Marquez a latest factory bike in a Gresini team on Gresini colours when they could put him in there? They wouldn't want to lose to him, so why would they do that? And someone actually made the same comment. You know, it's a no-brainer for Ducati to put Martin in there. He deserves the seat. But what about Marc to KTM? Someone has said, and this is a thing that we've talked about. You know, it maybe a few years ago, Pete, it would have seemed to be the thing, but Pedro Acosta is here, and that is their rider. But could KTM try something for me 1 year? Maybe. Say to Acosta, look, you're happy enough at Gasgas, you're leading that brand, you're the face of it. 1 more year, stay there. We'll get Marc in for 1 year, maybe. Would you think that could be an option? Maybe even the same with Martin as well.
I think the thing with Marc is, would he want to go with another bike, a third different bike in 3 years, isn't it? It was always, as you say, it was always the obvious connection, wasn't it? The Red Bull, the KTM. It seemed like that would be where Marc would go, and instead, surprises us all with a satellite Ducati. But you know, Marc's been saying things like the Ducati is the most complete bike on the grid, and all this. You know, he understands it now. It's not been easy, is it? He's had to go through this sort of adaptation process, which he now says is over, but here we are, 5 races, or it took him 4 or 5 races plus the winter testing to get to this stage, to then do it all again at KTM. I mean, maybe if it was a long-term deal and it is a full factory seat, then maybe you go for it. Again, is that a plan B? Is that a plan C? As I say, I think we can safely say plan A is the factory team seat, obviously, for both Martin and for Marquez. And then what's plan B? You know, with Martin, it sounds like if we take him at his word, plan B is you go to a factory team somewhere else, like KTM. With Marc, I think, as I say, you've got a better chance if you're Ducati of keeping him with the factory spec bike. And the point that the listener made, absolutely, you know, we've always said this, do you want to be beaten by your own satellite team? And as I say, that's why if you can run him in the same factory colours, you're taking some of that away, aren't you? That's why it just helps a little bit with that. You know, it's not so much then the blue bike winning. What's that bike? You know, it's a red bike, it's a Ducati, it's winning. You know, people are not going to dive too deep into it when they see it on all the marketing posters.
That's it. Yeah.
So that's but it is a tricky one. It is it's the problem you face when you have too many fast riders, isn't it? It's a nice problem to have, but you know, every couple of years you get this dilemma where you just you can't keep everyone happy. And as I say, KTM, I mean, to come back to Martin, obviously it looked like he would be coming into MotoGP with KTM, and then he got out of that contract, the whole COVID season, and the clauses and things expired, so he was able to then go to Ducati and Pramac. And at the time, remember, KTM hadn't won a race, so it was just before the start of the 2020 season that he signed for Pramac and Ducati, and then Brad Binder comes in and wins whatever it was, the 3rd race, wasn't it? So at the time he did it, you could understand it. You know, it wasn't the KTM it is now. But KTM, they can see, I mean, the guy's leading the World Championship by 38 points, beating these guys. And it's amazing how, you know, past differences can be overcome when you've got that kind of situation, isn't it? Where you got Martin, who might need, who might need to leave Ducati if he doesn't get the factory team seat, and you've got KTM going, we can sign this young guy who's beating the other Ducati guys and leading the World Championship. So yeah, I think any differences in the past can be quickly buried if there's a chance to do something for mutual benefit.
Exactly. No, you're spot on. You think about it. There's so many plot lines with it. Like, you've got history with everyone linking to certain teams. Even a guy, I made the point. Marquez has history with Aprilia. He won on a derby in 125, and it's like it goes back to that. That bike is in their factory in Italy. They have that 125 that he won on. So he's still seen as a. They look at him as like he created history for our company. That whole brand. So I don't know what's going to happen with those three, who it affects, but the one person I want to talk about, Pete, like you said, he stays in the Factory Ducati team, and he's going to have to deal with whoever's his teammate. It's Pecco Bagnaia. I know the answer. I'm just going to ask the question. In an ideal world, who do you think he would really like? I think he would like to stay the same. That would be my just how I would view it. But he said it's bullshit. Really, he doesn't really care who's his teammate. Who do you think, and how his mentality would be if he had to come up against Marc in a factory team? Do you think that would be a frosty relationship?
Well, I think, as we saw from Marc's documentaries, haven't we, recently, anyone going into a team next to Marc, it's going to be, let's say, a challenge, isn't it? I mean, it's not something you take on lightly. I mean, Marc is a competitor on and off the track, isn't he? It's all round. He doesn't just stop when when the flag comes out. So, as you say, I mean, I'm sure Pecco seems to have a great relationship with Bastianini. They're both similar characters, quite laid back and everything else. So I mean, I'm sure he certainly said last year, didn't he, when there was the rumours about Jorge Martin perhaps taking over the factory seat for this year if he won the championship. Pecco was saying, wasn't he, that he thought that would be unfair for Bastianini given his injuries, and that he needed to have a real chance at it. I mean, on the other side of it, you look at it, Marc, remember, there's always rumours, Marc will never have Lorenzo in his team. He'll never have, and in fairness, he didn't block it, did he? When Lorenzo joined the team, there was a lot of people that said it wouldn't happen. And Marc, he always said, look, the team decides who my teammate is and I don't get involved. And people were sort of, yeah, right. But, that's how it happened. There's not, Lorenzo joined the team. It was going to be this big G team, as it didn't turn out that way, did it? But he certainly didn't, from Marc's point of view. He has never been afraid of having whoever as his teammate. And we saw that for the past. I mean, look at the guys he's had coming in against Danny Pedrosa. I mean, Danny, always a fast rider, especially back when Marc joined him, wasn't he? He was Honda's top guy. So, it's he's never been afraid to have a top teammate. I think Bagnaia. So I can't imagine. Yeah, I mean, how they'll get on, it's difficult to say until it starts. But I mean, we've seen Marc. He's congratulating Bagnaia after the races. He's not complaining when they're rubbing wheels and everything else. Is he? He's not getting involved in any sort of controversy with the other Ducati riders. And so there's no war going on that would make that a difficult situation. But as I say, I think anyone that goes up against Marc in the same garage, you're gonna have to be on your toes, aren't you?
Yeah, you have to be absolutely locked in 120% every single time, because he's going to bring that mentality that he's always had in his career, and he will just, not that he just doesn't care. I think he just wants to just show you, I'm Marc Marquez. Mentality is just, I will beat you no matter what if we're on the same package. So yeah, I love to see it. And the flip side goes to Martin as well. I think the relationship that him and Pecco have, Pete, it's very, I don't think it's talked about enough. They were teammates in Moto 3, and they were like best of friends at the circuit, essentially. They helped each other grow. But then, you've seen it last year, it got a bit tense between those two because they had known each other for this long. And Martina kind of said at the end of the year, well, there's no real relationship there. We're not friends anymore. And I'm like, well, imagine this in a factory team under the same roof. That would be, like I say, maybe a bit more explosive compared to Marc and Pecco, because they're the same age essentially too. That's a big thing to think about as well. The history that those two have, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a good point. As you say, it's easy to be friends with other riders until you're fighting for the same thing, isn't it? And then Yeah, it's very difficult then. I think that one of the few exceptions was Dovi when he was fighting with Mark. I remember Mark saying he just couldn't understand it because he'd always had all these championship battles and it was always just pure war almost. And there's Dovi sort of chatting to you after a race and, oh, I saw you, going into that corner and losing the front, or how was your tire, and just being like a normal guy, because that's how Dovi always was and is. And I remember asking Mark about it during their title battles, and he said, yeah, it's just it's completely new situation for him to have that. You fight on the track, but then as soon as you finish,
it's finished. Yeah,
it's just fine. Yeah, and you're just talking like you're two guys that love riding bikes. But yeah, I think. Again, you've got that different dynamic, haven't you? Mark is the older guy, isn't he? So you've got Pecco there. Mark is the older guy. He's the guy. He's got all this history, all these championships behind him. But as you say, you've got Martin, who's a guy who's rising, who's on the up. As he said himself, he's the only guy without a MotoGP title at the moment of those three, isn't he? And so he's there. He's pushing to come up to Pecco's level. So it's a different dynamic, isn't it?
Yeah.
You've got one guy looking to come back to the top, but has got all of these records and success behind him, and Martin who's still on the up. And honestly, it's so hard to say how it will be in a team, but certainly it's something you've got to manage, haven't you? You've got to be on top of, and you've got to draw the line of. This is what you fight on the racetrack, but you also work with the team. It's that really difficult balance that all teams have to try and deal with, but especially when you have top riders fighting for a world championship.
Yeah, and the final question I have for you, Pete, do you think that Marc Marquez's history of being in a factory team for so long is an advantage for him because he knows what it's like to be the guy, essentially? Martin, it's a bit of an unknown for him. He's had support. Yeah, he is a factory rider, but he's not in a factory team. Is that something that Ducati would look at when Gigi says the history? Is that what he means by that? He looks at Marc being a model of the factory. Is that what he'd want?
That's an interesting one. Yeah, I mean, Marc obviously has all this experience of being in a factory team, but a factory Honda team and a Japanese team.
Very different.
I think that's quite different to being in Ducati. Also because Gigi's one of these guys, and he's always said, I listen to all the riders. I look at the data from all the riders. He's never been one to just focus on one rider. Even the guy leading the world championship, he's looking for common patterns of riders saying the same things about the bike and about what it needs and all that kind of thing. So I think they're less prone. They've almost, Gigi's revival of Ducati has not been based around a rider, has it? It's been based around raising the bike and then putting the riders on it. Whereas when Marc was at Honda, it was about making sure that the super talent had the bike as he wanted it. And so it's a different philosophy, isn't it? And we saw it could be fantastically successful, as we saw at Honda. But if your star rider then gets injured, as we saw, or something, the bike is no longer good enough even for him, you've got big problems. Whereas at Ducati, if something happens to one rider, or if he leaves, Dovi, he leaves, decides he's not continuing, that's it. You can then put someone else on the bike. There's other guys, the bike is at a high enough level for someone else to then step in. It's a rideable bike because you've developed it around the opinions of a lot of different riders. So I think he's obviously going to value Marc's experience. There's nobody with that amount of experience on the grid, especially because Pecco and Martin have only ever ridden a Ducati, haven't they? So Marc's going to come in with that knowledge of the Honda, and you might say, well, yeah, but look where the Honda is. But the engineers are always interested in what other bikes do, because no bike is bad in all areas. I mean, as we saw, the Honda in braking was still impressive, wasn't it? Even with all its other troubles. So engineers, they're always interested. That's why you always see them walking the full length of the grid. They'll look at the bikes at the back of the grid. There's always something they can learn. And so, certainly Marc can bring that in that the other guys can't. You can look at it either way. On the other hand, those guys have grown up on a Ducati. They know the Ducati system. They know how it works. I don't think there's going to be any conflict with them move. If you move Martin into that role at the factory team, he knows how the situation is, how the bike's developed, all that kind of stuff. So, honestly, it's. I think all we can say is with Gigi, he is obviously a great engineer, and for him, I think he's going to look at all this data that they get from the riders, who's special where, who's on the up, what will the situation be, who can we afford to lose, even because potentially whoever you don't sign, you're going to have to beat next year at another team, as you've just been suggesting what they might be. And that's also got to be something in your head, isn't it? Who would you rather, if you're Ducati, who would you rather fight against next year, if you see what I mean?
Yeah, no, I can't wait for this weekend, Pete. No, it was great to chat about that. Actually, a lot of stuff covered. Hope the listeners enjoyed that. That's a good segment just to look back on, because who knows, we could speak next week, it could be completely different.
It
So
might all change.
it could be completely different. But yeah, one to watch this weekend. I'll just say to everyone, when you're watching the broadcast, just watch Gigi Dall'Igna in that box, sitting, stroking his chin, looking at the screen. You'll have Davide Tardozzi, he'll be stressed out. Gigi will be sitting just looking. The guy sees MotoGP so differently to everyone else. So yeah, whatever the decision is, I'm sure they know it's the right one. And like I say, we'll just have to wait for an announcement. It could be next week, could be the week after, could be in 2 months' time. Who knows? They could just reevaluate everything. But like we say, Catalan Grand Prix, preview it. It was an epic race last year for Aprilia. Pete, they got their first ever Premier Class 1-2 with Elisa Spargaro winning. You know, going into this weekend, Aprilia will have expectation that if it's like what it was last year, they have to fancy their chances, surely, don't they, of getting the same sort of results that they did.
Yeah, I mean they've got to obviously hope for another dream weekend like that, wasn't it? It was unbelievable, especially a home race for Alicia as well, literally
Yep.
home, if you know what I mean. Growing up not far from the track, so yeah, and made amends a bit, didn't he, for the year before and the whole mess up with the last lap
Yeah.
signals and everything else. So yeah, I mean just unbelievable performance from them. The low grip track, the Aprilia, exactly why it works so well there. Who knows? In low grip conditions, this idea, is it because it's more corner speed that they're not relying on grip out of the corners quite so much, so maybe when the grip is low they don't lose quite as much. Whatever it is, the Aprilia just seems to go well in low grip. But let's see this year, let's see what if that trend continues, and at the same time a lot of it's going to depend on the Ducati chatter thing, isn't it, that
Yes.
hasn't been an issue in recent rounds, and they've been back up there dominating, and sort of a step ahead of the KTMs and the Aprilias. But this should be the one. The low grip was apparently where they suffer with the chatter. So if they're going to get it again, let's say, this will be the weekend where we see it. So it'll be a bit of a test to see if all the settings that they've done to try and stay away from that chatter and vibration issue, if those have worked. And if they have, I mean, yeah, they could spoil Aprilia's hopes of a dream double, shall we say?
Yeah.
If they were to do the same as last year. But yeah, so a big weekend for both of those factories in terms of looking to the future as well. And KTM, obviously, they need to, they've just been off the boil a little bit the past few rounds. Again, as Ducati have come up, they were the guys that were taking the fight to them with Aprilia. But
KTM, and when you're on the subject of KTM, I said the stat before, Pete, this is the last dry win that they actually had in MotoGP, was around here with Oliveira in 21. So, well, if you're counting the sprints last year, Binder did win in Jerez, but Grand Prix, I'm not getting into the record books, so I'm not. But yeah, it's a big weekend for them because, like you say, Ducati have seemingly solved. Well, the issue's not reared its head again for the chatter, but KTM, Acosta's mentioned it. The other KTM riders, the chatter is maybe shifted onto them now with this new profile of the tires. How do they bounce back? Because yeah, they did have an okay, when you look at Binder at the end of the last Grand Prix, did finish 8th place, but it was a disaster leading up to that. Acosta having his first DNF, Jack Miller crashing out. It's a real up and down season for KTM, but maybe we expected them to be more consistent.
Yeah, it started off really well, didn't it? And it seemed like they, this was going to be their best chance yet to fight for the championship, which, as we know, has been their clear goal for the last couple of years. And yeah, the chatter does seem to have almost shifted across. It seems like that the KTM chatter occurs with high grip, or the vibration, as they like to call it, more than chatter. It seems that it comes from the rear tyre, as you say, and these kind of things. It happens for KTMs with high grip, and so that's why we've seen it on some of the recent tracks, whereas Ducati is low grip, and they haven't had the problem in the recent tracks. So if that continues, if that is right, then this weekend should be good for them, should be better for KTM. And we were talking about the rider decisions earlier, weren't we? And you mentioning there, you've got Costa now, you've got Binder, you've got Jack Miller up there as well. Maybe the teams are starting to realise that it always used to be that if you had 2 top riders, that was enough, wasn't it? That
you need at least 4 now, I reckon.
Exactly. Now you need 3 or 4, because otherwise we've seen some weekends where both Brad and Jack have had issues, and Acosta's been up there. And you think, well, if Acosta hadn't been up there, everyone would have thought, well, there's something wrong with the bike. And so, maybe, and again, as we're thinking about riders for next year, that maybe KTM are looking and going, you know what, we need to be like Ducati with 3 or 4, guys at the absolute top. Because you can still, even with 2 top riders, you can still have issues and have a bad event where neither of them is up there. So, this weekend, I mean, Acosta, another home race for Acosta. Obviously, there'll be a lot of he's had a run of them, isn't he? He's had Jerez, and he's had Tech 12's home race at Le Mans, and now he's going back to another Spanish round. So I mean, I'm sure he'll obviously be popular among the fans, and he'll want to deliver for them. And let's see how he gets on. I mean, with his bike control, those sort of low grip conditions, could be good for him, couldn't it?
It's pretty special, yeah. And I imagine there's always the photos that go around of them getting their shoulder down on the curb. I just know that Jorge Martin wants to do it. Fabio Quartararo wants to do it. I could just see Pedro Acosta doing it because, that's another thing to tick off, isn't it, in his box. But yeah, it's a real, like you say, the low grip of this track. I remember the one, I think it was the COVID year in 2020. Fabio Quartararo was leading on the Petronas Yamaha, and Suzuki's were so good on their tyres, and they ate into his lead and nearly caught him with 1 lap to go. So could we see that sort of race again this weekend, like you say, Pete, if Ducati are struggling? Could we have someone, maybe like the Aprilias, maybe they just disappear, but we could get a situation where it's that cat and mouse where they just claw and eat into the lead, and we could get a grandstand finish.
Yeah, it has been a tyre wear track, hasn't it? Yeah, you're absolutely right there. And then you look at the guys that are good at Bastianini, just jumps out as somebody who's good at making a tyre last a bit longer than the others. And so it could play into his hands this weekend. We should say the race, of course, it's been moved forward, isn't it, from last year? It was, September, I think, last year? So September, we're a bit earlier in the year. There's been sometimes at Catalunya, the temperatures are roasting hot. I think it's going to be quite, let's say, reasonable this weekend, sort of low 20s. It might be a bit of rain on Thursday, but otherwise okay. So whether that just having a bit of a lower temperature might mean that there's not so much tyre wear, but certainly in the past, as you say, it's been a track where taking care of the tyres has been a big part of the victory. And it'll certainly be the riders that are good at that. They should have an advantage this weekend, yeah.
Yes, we'll keep on the theme of the Japanese manufacturers, mentioning Quartararo winning there. He's actually won, I think it's 3 times he's won there. So he won in 2020, 21, and in 22. So it's a track that's No, he didn't win in 21. Sorry, I apologise. I just messed up my stats.
Was that a year with the leathers?
Yeah, that was the zipper year. That was the zipper year. Yes. Right. Then that was that was incredible when you think about that. What happened, and then he had the joke, obviously, in the test after, where he got on the bike with essentially just his shorts on as a joke in the picture. It was really quite cool. But yeah, Fabio likes this circuit, and it's a track that, like you say, tires come into it. It doesn't really matter what bike you are on them. When the tires start going, anyone can struggle. If you've saved them, it's game on essentially. But I want to talk about Joan Mir and Honda, Pete. It's been a real, maybe the past week for Joan Mir. He's came out with a lot of comments saying his options on the table for next year, doesn't know what his plans are yet. And then he actually went on to say at the start of the week, the end of last week, that he can't really take much more. His body can't take much more of a battering from the Honda. What does he do for the future? It sounds quite desperate, to be honest, for his future, doesn't it?
Yeah, so I suppose if we take a step back, so we've got the 4 Honda riders, haven't we? We know that he's got a contract for next year at LCR, and we know that Marini's got a contract for next year, but Mir is out of contract, and Nakagami as well. So there is, Mir's got a decision to make there, and Honda have do they keep Mir in that place next to Marini? Does Mir want to stay there? Does he go elsewhere? Does he do like Marc did? Does he look and think, what? I've been a world champion. I've made lots of money. Now I just want to get on a bike that I know is going to work. After 2, let's face it, tough years at Honda. This year's been better for him, hasn't it? I mean, obviously results-wise, he's nowhere near where he wants to be, but he's top Honda, and that's always, you can only do so much on the same bike, should we say? If you're beating everyone else that's on the same equipment as you, then you're doing a good job. So, but as you say, he's almost. You can see that he's not sure. What do I do? What's the timeline on this? Isn't it? I think that's what everyone's really thinking for both Japanese teams. What's the timeline to get that performance back? And that's the massive question, isn't it? Quartararo is obviously, he's he signed the paper, he said, effectively said, yeah, okay, I know that this is going to be the timeline is going to be reasonable, let's say, and I think he's thinking for next year that he'll be competitive again. And so he signed up, he's all in, and he's going to stay with the project and believes it will come back to the front. But yeah, you got the Honda guys, and Mia's got to make that decision, hasn't he? He's there on the inside, and of course he wants to see progress. And there's the private test. You were telling me there was some bit of footage that come out from the test this week. I mean, that would have been important as well at this time of year where people are thinking about what they're going to do for the following year. You want to see that there's a direction. We hear that from Honda a lot, don't we? And from Mia, that they need a direction. They need somewhere where they get to the point where they know, this is where we go to get out of this hole, if you like, isn't it? And it seemed like a lot of big changes to the bike, but the direction wasn't really there, was it, in the opening rounds? They haven't, they've lost the braking strength that we spoke about previously when Marquez was on the bike, if you like, in his glory years. They've lost that, and they haven't really gained in the traction and the rear grip, and now they're struggling with turning. So they really do badly need to start pointing the whole project in the right direction and making progress there. So interesting to see, did they find something at this private test? We obviously private test, but by their name, media are not allowed into the track or into the pit lane. The riders don't speak, and give debriefs and everything else. So we'll get to ask them obviously on Thursday in Catalunya, and they'll tell us whatever they're allowed to tell us, shall we say? So we'll wait and see on that. But I think if you're Joan Mir, that's what you're looking at, isn't it? It's am I seeing the progress, or do I do what Marc did and look for a European bike, even if it's a satellite team, and just say, look, I want a bike that I know I can be competitive on week in, week out.
Exactly it, and that satellite bike team could be Trackhouse, Pete. Davide Brivio, we've got that link. They're obviously sending to Suzuki, and then they had that history, that fantastic world title win. Maybe that could be Mir's landing spot. Who knows? I could see him at multiple teams, but it just depends how things fall into place. And again, it all comes down to what happens at the top with Ducati, and it filters down. It, like you say, it's a domino effect of this market. It's so difficult to predict. And speaking of predictions, I want to ask about Grand Prix sprint predictions. Pete, who do you think will be your sprint winner this weekend?
I will go with the sprint king, Jorge Martin. I think not a very shocking prediction there, but yes, I'll go with him. I think I think he's going to be yet again. He's going to be on the front row, and he's going to be up there fighting for it. Whether he'll get it or not, I don't know, but I'm pretty sure he'll be in the fight for the win.
Do you know what? I agree, but I'm going to change. I actually think, like we've said, with the Aprilias, I think Maverick Vinales is going to win the sprint. I think, to be honest, it could be between him or Aleix to win the sprint if they're both qualified well. Like I say, you've got Martin, you've got Marquez, you've got all those other elements added into it. But I think Vinales, we've seen how good he's been in sprints, especially in Coda. I think this track should suit them, and he was quick here last year. Yeah, Maverick for me is my pick for the sprint. Grand Prix is very different, Pete. Like we say, tire wear. If it's hot, it's going to be a very difficult race. Who do you think will be the winner of the Catalan Grand Prix?
Well, carrying on with that, I'm going to go for Aleix. I'm going to go for the home hero. Just on the assumption, as we've said, that the Aprilia ends up working as well, if not better. Who knows with all this aero, as it did at the track last year. Aleix is going to be fired up, isn't he? We don't know about his future yet. Who knows? It might be his last home race. So, I think that would be, what a dream result that could be, while we're still waiting to hear what he wants to do for the future. So, I'll go with Aleix for many reasons.
Yeah, do you know what? It's logical, isn't it? Because he's been so strong in Barcelona. Even, do you know what? I even think about just the track in general. He loves it because, do you remember in 2015 when him and Maverick qualified first and second for Suzuki? It was like, even then, they've got that whole, they just like the circuit too, and it suits their bike currently. Yeah, but for me, I think it's difficult. It really is difficult. I'm going to say Pecco Bagnaia is going to win the Grand Prix. He started obviously from pole last year, had that horrific crash, and thankfully he was okay. But I think he'll be strong, and I think that he'll be wanting to prove to the other two, especially Marc and Jorge, that I'm still number one around here. Don't forget about that. And yeah, but whoever wins it, it'll be a hard fought victory, and I hope some close racing. For Rob's predictions, he did tell me before we started he thinks that Honda's going to win the sprint and Yamaha are going to win the Grand Prix. That was his predictions. I'm only joking. Rob, I apologise. But yeah, we'll be back next for the preview or the review of the Catalan Grand Prix. Pete is going to be there this weekend, so he'll have plenty of stuff to tell us. And yeah, let us know your predictions in the comments below. Who do you think is going to win the sprint and the Grand Prix? But if you enjoyed the podcast, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, like the video. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, make sure to give us a 5-star rating. It helps us out massively on the charts. And yeah, we'll see you next week. Take care.